Hello and welcome to another episode of the Classical Republican. Today we're talking with Abraham Alsop, who has worked with the American Solidarity Party in Idaho. Thank you for coming on, Abraham. My first question is, can you describe the ASP in 30 seconds?
Sure, thanks, John. The Solidarity Party is the American incarnation of an international movement that goes by various names. Some call it the social justice movement, or Christian Democrats, or just centrists. We see the dignity of every human being, and we know that we must all work together to take care of everyone. The only way we'll succeed at taking care of the poor, immigrants, and the environment is when our society is built on a foundation of strong families and local communities who instill in everyone that respect for the dignity of all human life.
Well, that's beautiful. Thank you. Can you tell us about your involvement in the ASP? How did you hear about them, and how did you get involved?
I joined the party in 2016 when the other parties made it clear that they no longer want people like me. The Democrats used to care about the little people, but then they've pushed out everyone who cares about the unborn. Republicans went through a phase where they talked a lot about family values, but at the expense of the poor and the foreigners. Refusing to vote is not an option. Our protest needs to be counted at the ballot box. So by reducing the percentage that the mainstream parties take, we make it clear that they don't represent us. Because I was one of the first in Idaho in the Solidarity Party, I became the state chairman. We had about 50 Idahoans register over the next few years, spread throughout the state. I would send out email and occasionally postal letters to try to get people involved. We did have an in-person meeting once and 4 people showed up. So because Idaho is so geographically spread out, we just don't have a critical mass anywhere. I invited Boise Mayor Dave Beater to join the party once in 2019, but no response. In 2020, I filled out the paperwork to register Brian Carroll as a presidential candidate in Idaho, and he did receive 163 write-in votes in that election. But due to the lack of activity here, we're considering consolidating with Oregon and Washington to have a single Pacific Northwest chapter.
Were you more Boise centric, or did you have votes from all over Idaho?
We are scattered. There's some pockets in Boise and in northern Idaho. And
oh, really?
People in the east.
And anybody in Twin Falls?
Maybe 1 or 2.
Huh. Interesting. So what are your favorite tenets of the ASP?
We all need to work together for the common good, with no one left behind or sitting on the sidelines. 60 years ago, JFK said, "Ask not what your country can do for you, but what you can do for your country." And I don't see that spirit of personal responsibility anymore in either party. We have to start with strong families and communities who take care of the country, not the other way around. The principle of subsidiarity demands that problems be solved by the most local level possible. And only when those organizations fail would a higher government need to step in. So we absolutely need to do a better job of taking care of the poor, the immigrants, and the unborn. And for the most part, our local community can do that without unconstitutional interference from the federal level. As long as we're not being torn apart by national arguments that are designed to divide us along the lines of race, gender, income, or parties, we'll only survive if we get past that and find common ground and help each other.
Yeah. In doing research on the ASP, I've seen the term whole life. Can you tell us about that? What's a whole life policy?
Yes. Well, when you carry that principle of human dignity to its logical conclusion, then it means we have to stand up for the most vulnerable human beings, even when it's inconvenient, and especially when they're unpopular. The main parties pretend to care about life, but their inconsistency belies their true loyalties. I have to question the motives of those who want to throw more money at health insurance, but yet are willing to let babies die. And what good is it to stand up for babies in the womb, but then abandon them to the free market immediately after they're born? Whole life means not just ending abortion, but providing healthcare for all, welcoming refugees, ending war, torture, the death penalty, and euthanasia. If you're willing to sacrifice any of those things, then you care more about your agenda than about human beings.
So a lot of times, third parties will, third parties are very instrumental in maybe not getting candidates elected, but in pushing issues. And so a lot of times you can see other parties, the duopoly of the two other main parties will take on or co-opt one of those issues. And so, I mean, that's, they're kind of undermining the third party, but at the same time, the third party is getting what they want. Would something like Medicaid for all or Medicare for all be something that the ASP would support?
Yes, we definitely support that universal basic standard of living. In a country as prosperous as America, we can certainly afford to let everybody get the basics. You'll notice, though, that during President Obama's term, when they attempted to do healthcare for all, really all they did is boost the insurance companies. They didn't really succeed at the goal of getting a basic level of healthcare for everyone. And again, that belies their true loyalties. They're feeding the big businesses rather than actually caring about real people.
Can you tell us more about economic policies?
Sure. G.K. Chesterton said that the problem with capitalism is not that there's too many property owners, but too few. I think the ideal would be that every family has sufficient resources to provide for their own basic needs without resorting to working for a wage. And there were times in the past where we were much closer to that ideal than we are now. For example, a peasant in the Middle Ages who grew their own food and built their own house was economically more free than a middle-class American whose house will get repossessed if they miss a couple of mortgage payments. But I understand that we live in a different time now. For our modern conveniences to survive, we can't all be farmers and live off the land. Some of us have to build cars and computers, operate retail stores, practice medicine and law. So we have an economy where people specialize so that we as a society can be more efficient and prosperous. I'm all for that as far as it goes, but there comes a point when a company's size just becomes so massive that it adds more bureaucracy than efficiency. So just like I said, the best government is a local government. So also the best business is a local business. I'd rather have a dozen family-owned shops, each with a different character, than one big Walmart. When more people are business owners and work for themselves, then people have an attitude of serving one another, not just slaving away for a boss. On a practical level, here's a concept that should appeal to ordinary folks on both the left and the right. It turns out that the best way to encourage people to become entrepreneurs and start businesses and grow the economy is to ensure that we have a social safety net, that universal minimum income and healthcare for all. This gives people the freedom to innovate and take risks without worrying that they'll become homeless if it doesn't work out. And they still have an incentive to work hard so they can rise above that minimum standard of living. The big businesses don't like this idea, not because it costs too much, but because many of their employees would be free to leave and become competitors. And we also need paid parental leave, just like they have in Europe, so that new parents can bond with their families. Note that this is the opposite of subsidizing daycare, which just pushes parents out of the home into the hands of their corporate bosses.
Are there, so say if the ASP got into the legislature or maybe into some public offices, what would probably be the first, what would be at the top of the agenda? What would be an easy lift? What would be the low-hanging fruit if this happened in Idaho and you were able to start pushing an agenda? What do you think would be easiest or most attractive to Idahoans?
Yeah, Idaho is an interesting state. We have a lot of wide open space, and people here really do care about preserving it. So I think our environmental policies would really resonate with Idahoans if they thought about it with an open mind. And we're not proposing those failed big government policies that are enforced by international treaties. We just want to help the local folks take care of their part of the earth. So we take a stand for conservation and local renewable energy sources ahead of big multinational corporations who come in from the outside and, as the song says, pave paradise to put up a parking lot. So we've got a lot of wind turbines here, especially around the, you're familiar with that, around the Twin Falls area. That's something the Solidarity Party is all for. And returning care for those public areas to the local people of Idaho.
All right, yeah, so you're, it's a big issue here to keep public land public. But there's been an effort by a lot of Western states to actually take over the stewardship of federal land and bring it to the state. And a lot of people are worried that that land is going to be sold off to rich people for their, whatever they want to do with it. I think that would be very popular. Is there anything that would be difficult for the ASP? It might be popular nationwide, but maybe especially here in Idaho, it would be difficult to get that.
Yeah, Idaho, like much of the West, has a tendency to be very libertarian. And while I sympathize greatly with the libertarians as a fellow third party, their policies tend to emphasize, leave me alone, I can take care of myself, which in many ways is the opposite of solidarity. In fact, none of us are completely independent, especially with this specialized economy that I mentioned. We all need each other, and our laws should encourage the rich to help the poor and the strong to help the weak. So while we agree that big government is not ideal, we also recognize that there is a place for government in areas where the local community needs help. And maybe the compromise that we find is states' rights and local control, where there are areas where we do need a government, but let's try to keep that government as local as possible.
Good. What do you see as to the future of the ASP in Idaho?
I think that in the past, our party has overemphasized the presidential elections in 2016 and 2020. That was a conscious decision at the time to gain visibility and attention across the country. But now that we're starting to make ourselves known, it's time to get started on the real work of electing people at the local level. The state legislative district that I live in is very competitive between the two main parties. So it would be difficult to get people in our neighborhood to consider a third option. However, there are other legislative districts that are dominated by one party and people are hungering for a change. So if the district is dominated by a Democrat, then we can step in and emphasize that we also care about the poor and diversity, but we want to extend that further to care for the poorest of all in the womb. And if the district is dominated by a Republican, then we can emphasize what we have in common, the family values that we share, while taking that even further by treating all humanity as our brothers and sisters. And once we get the first state legislator in, that will greatly increase our visibility in Idaho.
Do you have any plans for this year or 2024?
Not necessarily in Idaho. I mentioned that we are going to be working more closely with the Oregon and Washington chapters, and there is a candidate running for a Washington state legislative position. And so we would certainly support him, and it would be good to get a few local politicians elected. There are probably 10 or 12 prominent local solidarity people running for election in 2022. And if even a handful of those win, it would really show that our party is gaining traction.
Which offices are they running for? The legislature or?
Yes, state legislature. There's one person running for California Secretary of State. We had one person in the California governor election who's already been eliminated, I think, in the first round. The Solidarity Party has also endorsed a US congressional candidate from Illinois. He's running as a Democrat, but yet he's one of the few Democrats who are pro-life, and so we can stand behind his beliefs.
Oh, I think I heard about him. Yeah. Who's the guy in Washington that you mentioned? Do you have that name?
I should know that off the top of my head. But let me look
Sorry.
a little bit.
Okay. Are there any other local offices that are that you're trying to target, like county commissioners or city council or anything like that?
Not that I am aware of. I haven't been personally involved in anybody's campaign this time around.
Mhm.
So the name of the person in Washington is Oliver Black.
And do you know which district?
That's the Washington 3rd District.
All right. Okay, great. Well,
And that
that's
would
all.
be for the US Congress, actually, not the.
Oh,
not
for
the state.
Congress. Okay. All right. Well, that's
So
all
it
I.
looks like he did make it onto the ballot as well. So again, ballot access has been an obstacle in the past.
Yeah.
The different states have different rules, but Oliver Black did make it onto the ballot in Washington. So it's got a good chance of making a splash. You know, even getting 10 or 15% of the vote would be a huge win.
Yeah. All right, Abraham. Well, that's all the questions I have today. Is there anything else you want to leave with the audience before we go?
No, I would just say vote your conscience. Don't settle for second best just because everybody else is doing it.
All right. Yes. Good advice. Well, thank you very much. And
Thank you, John.
you have a good day.